Hey, let's talk about growth barriers today. You know, that ceiling, that number your church keeps bouncing off of, and no matter what you try, you just can't seem to break through. And if you have been stuck near the same attendance for a while, you probably already tried, I bet, a lot of new things. You tried new series concepts, better marketing, more social media stuff, an upgraded lobby. Maybe you built something. Maybe you just tried to fix the guest experience, or you did a refresh. Maybe you brought in a consultant who helped you improve the weekend flow. And come on, some of that helped, but that help just felt temporary, didn't it? Like the number kind of bumped barely past and then it just settled back to where it was. Here's what I would love for you to consider. What if the problem was never the weekend? I mean, the growth barrier showed up on the weekend, but what if the problem actually isn't in the weekend? See, growth barriers, and I have found this to be true, are almost universally misdiagnosed. Pastors treat them as attendance problems, right? So they solve for attendance. They work on things that are more attractive to people, better services, more inviting environments, stronger social media that shows off the church better. And listen, none of it breaks through fully because the barrier was never an attendance problem. Um, it's a leadership. It's a leadership structure problem to be specific. Specifically, right? Let's get a little more clear on this. It is a capacity problem at the leadership table. Here's the principle I want to lock in with you today. Your church is as large as your leadership table can hold. What if that was true? What if that is the actual barrier that your church can only grow as large as the capacity of your leadership table? Think about what that actually means. When your church hits 200, the coordination load, the pastoral care weight, the ministry complexity, whatever is required to reach 250 begins to exceed what your current team can manage, right? So, and it isn't because your team isn't talented enough or, isn't working hard, but it's because your team was built for a church of 175. That's the problem. And the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, right? The design is the problem. And so, what most pastors spent years improving things, right? And while never addressing the thing that is actually the problem. So, when the ceiling hits, most pastors, and we said earlier, kind of do the same thing. We want to improve things, or we stretch existing things, like we stretch our existing leadership teams. We ask more of the people who are already at or near capacity because, again, we designed it for 175 and now we've hit over 200, barely. But we keep coming back back to that 175 number, and we can't figure out why that's the lid. Well, we built it for 175. And now we're asking people to do more, to run harder, to try harder, to be in more meetings, to launch more initiatives. And you know what happens? I mean, this is a strain on you, on everybody. I mean, it might be a relationship, it might be a volunteer pipeline that starts leaking, it might be a ministry that mattered, but the person running it quietly kind of starts pulling back a little because let's just call it, they're exhausted. And then the pastor scrambles. You scramble. Yeah, you're trying to fill in gaps, make adjustments, hold everything together, and it becomes very reactive, right? And so I want to be kind of honest about this with us because I've seen this so many times. It really feels responsible what you're doing. It feels responsible. Like the pressure is real. The need is, they are real. And responding like that feels like the right move. But here is the structural reality. Reactive leadership is always behind the curve. It cannot solve a ceiling problem because it is responding to the symptoms while the actual cause keeps compounding. Think about that. A reactive leader is always behind the curve. You can't get ahead of a barrier if you're always behind it. Like you can't build leadership capacity after you need it. So by the time the gap is visible to most people, you're already paying the price for the gap. Like your team feels it before you even have to say it out loud. There's a fatigue that doesn't resolve after a week off, a vacation. There's a sense of being capable, but stuck. And so the ministry that functions but doesn't grow, this is what's happening. And it's, by the way, not a season, but it is a signal. So here's the counterintuitive move. And this is actually what will resolve the barrier. If you want to lift that lid, if you want to not bump up against that ongoing number that you just can't get past. Here is the move, but it is a counterintuitive thought. What you do, you build the leadership capacity for the next level before you get there. That's the solution. You don't wait till you arrive to build it, not when you need it, not when the need becomes almost untenable, undeniable. You build the capacity before. And here's what's weird about this. It's going to feel wrong at first. It means investing in a table that looks way too large for the current room you are in. All right. It means defining roles before you can even fill them, designing for complexity that doesn't even exist yet. It kind of feels silly. It can feel irresponsible, like a waste of time. But here is what that kind of architecture actually creates. It's a beautiful word, margin. And margin is what growth moves through. Okay. Obstacles are removed where margin exists. I'd love for you to remember that. Okay. Obstacles get removed where margin exists. Without margin, every new person who shows up, every new ministry decision, every new layer of complexity collides with a table, a leadership table that is already full to overflowing. And guess what happens? Everything stalls again. Okay. So the breakthrough, I love this. It is not attendance, it's structure. When you build the table, the leadership table, ahead of the growth, something powerful shifts. So, like the team has room to think, to move, complexity gets absorbed instead of creating a crisis. Leaders at the next level have space to develop. The church begins to grow into a structure that has already designed to hold it. I can share a personal story on this. This is exactly what happened at Woodstock City Church when I became the lead pastor. If you know anything about our story, it was called Watermark Church back then. I arrived as the lead pastor in November of 2008, and our church was struggling. The word I would use now is it needed to be revitalized. I didn't know that word back then. So it was a revitalization kind of opportunity. We did have maybe 200 people coming on a Sunday, so that wasn't a tiny church, but we had a lot more than that previously. I'm the third lead pastor in 3 years. Everything, for the most part, is heading in the wrong direction. At least the metrics are. But we knew that things could turn around if we really locked in as a leadership team. So, one of the first things we did, I bet we did this before the end of that year, maybe within 6 weeks of my arrival. We sat down as a team, and by then it was a team of maybe four and a half people. We sat down and we drew out an org chart and ideated through what would an org chart look like for this church if we had 500 people or 1,000 people. There were a lot of boxes on that org chart that we did not need today, but we knew we would need them. Now, we put all of our names in that org chart. My name was in probably 8 different boxes on the org chart that day, but as we began to grow and see some improvement, we didn't bump into those natural lids as easily because we knew what the structure needed to look like before we got there. It also helped us begin to identify the kinds of people we needed at the leadership team table before we needed them. We were able to invite volunteers into conversations before they were desperately needed. We were able to create margin because we knew what the organization needed to look like. That's just one example of how to use an org chart that way. But you can think of your leadership table or anything around what a leadership table produces in the same way. So if you decide to do this, do not be surprised, by the way, this is going to happen. Don't be surprised if not everyone in their current role at the current table will welcome the idea and welcome the expansion. And here's why. When the table grows, influence does get redistributed. Ownership narrows. Like what one person used to carry alone may now have a partner, or maybe that role is split into 2 different places. And maybe there's a new overseer to something, or a lane that gets more clearly defined. And that friction is almost never about, this isn't theology and mission and vision. It's really about control with that person. I've watched a lot of pastors avoid expanding the table for years because they were managing that friction instead of just addressing it. And you know what happens? That lid, that ceiling, that barrier, it just stays in place. And in some times, it actually gets stronger. It's like something that was pliable is now cast in cement. So it's a hard truth, but the right leader at the wrong capacity level is still a lid. I mean, a good person, but without the right capacity is still going to create a lid. So sometimes expansion requires structural decisions, right? This isn't not just isn't like an emotional conversation. You've heard the phrase addition by subtraction. It's a real leadership tool, and not drama and punishment. We're not trying to do any of that, but we really do want to design or have design decisions that are made in the interest of the mission, not an individual person. So you probably are sensing this. I am in no way suggesting that this is easy to do, but I am saying it's often necessary if you want to break through that barrier. So here's what I would love for you to do before your next leadership meeting. Identify one ministry area in your church that is currently limited by leader capacity. This isn't a budget limitation, right? It's not limited by pace, but it is limited by the fact that somebody, one person, is carrying what 2 or 3 people really need to own to create the kind of margin that's required to create growth. And I'd love you to name it like specifically. Then define the roles that would remove that lid. And write them down. Like I mentioned, create an org chart for that ministry. Write them down. What is the scope of the responsibilities in those boxes? What's the job descriptions? What authority does each of those roles in each box carry? How much or how does it relate to the existing leadership table? And you may not be able to fill, obviously, this in a week or even in a month, right? But define it anyway so you know what you're working towards. In fact, the act of defining it is the first structural move that you need to make. Like it names what you are building towards, and it commits you to building ahead of the need instead of scrambling after you bump into the lid. And then, bring this question to your next leadership meeting. Which ministry area would move fastest if we had one more leader at the table? And again, you're not, telling people you're going to hire somebody. You may bring in volunteers to do this. In fact, I would encourage you to start with volunteers in this space. So the conversation that follows is going to probably tell you exactly where the ceiling is, or I hate to say it this way, who the ceiling is. And it will start the structural shift that makes the breakthrough maybe possible. So let me close with this because I really do think this matters in this conversation. Every month that a growth barrier stays unaddressed because of, a lack of structural investment, what we're really doing is reinforcing the ceiling with the weight of a misdiagnosis, right? You're going to keep improving things that are not broken. Like the weekend will get tighter, the sermon may get stronger, right? The marketing cleaner. And the church will still plateau at the same number over and over and over again because the table didn't change. The structure under the problem didn't change. And your team will carry that, but they're going to carry it pretty quietly, and then they're going to fatigue, and capable but stuck is going to be the feeling, and the ministry is going to function, but it's never going to break through. And you're going to be stuck wondering why. And here's what I know about you. You didn't get into pastoral leadership to bump into immovable objects and ceilings and lids. Like your church doesn't grow, though, past the size of its capacity, of its leadership table. You have to expand it before you need to expand it. Now, if you want to read about this, I wrote about it today. It's on the blog. You can go to gavinadams.com. There's some other nuanced conversation in that. So go check that out. And, of course, if any of this resonates with you and you want to talk through it a little bit or think through it a little bit more, just reach out to me. Just shoot me an email, gavin@gavinadams.com. I read every email that comes to me and respond personally. So I'd love for you to shoot me an email. Let me know what you're bumping into, and maybe we can help solve that problem together. Hey, until next time, let's keep adding more intention to our mission.